Hey everyone, I'm Sophie. I'm the co-organizer for TEDxAtlanta, and we are hosting this webinar about resilience in partnership with Hillside. So we have Gabriella and Taylor here from Hillside, and Taylor will be doing a quick presentation later about how to build resilience. So I want to start with a quick introduction of TEDxAtlanta. We're actually celebrating our 15-year birthday this year. So we've been operating since 2009. With our fearless leader, Jackie, who some of you may know. And our mission really has always been about building community, building stronger connections through deeper conversation and through innovation, through new ideas and new perspectives. So we do that through a variety of events, through webinars like this. We also have adventures throughout the year. We have salons, which are more discussion-based, and obviously our main stage annual event. So I'll share a link in the chat if you're interested in joining any of other events, but we have one on the 30th of January about AI, and we have our main annual conference on the 28th of February. So once I'm done talking, I'll share a couple links in the chat if you're interested in knowing more. But we are 100% volunteer powered. So if anyone here is interested in volunteering or partnering with us, or even just attending the event, we're looking for all kinds of people to help us build this community. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And yeah, the reason for hosting this webinar was, in the political climate right now, and especially in the holiday season where a lot of people are coming together, family members are coming together, it's just important to see how we can navigate any difficult conversation that may arise. So that's why we decided to partner with Hillside, which is a leading Atlanta-based mental health provider for children and adolescents. But I'll let Taylor give a bit of a deeper explanation of that. And Taylor is a licensed professional counselor, and she's been that for over 7 years at Hillside. So we'll start with a presentation from her for about the first half of this hour. And then we'll dive into a Q&A. So feel free to share your questions in the chat or in the Q&A section of this Zoom. If you want to keep them anonymous, that's fine too. There's the option to do that. And then make sure you're reacting and sharing your thoughts and questions throughout so that we can then have some time at the end for a discussion. And that's it from me. I'll hand it off to Taylor.
Hello. My name is Taylor Welchel. I have been working at Hillside for the past 7 years, and Hillside is a place that we're really working on offering a range of programs that kind of serve young people struggling with mood disorders like depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. And each year we treat around 900 children and their families. Currently, I've kind of been working in our virtual IOP program, but we have everything from residential to like outpatient, intensive in-home. So we have a wide range of kind of ways that we work with children. So mostly I'm working with teenagers. It is exciting to get to talk to a bunch of adults on some of these topics. But in doing my work, I've really had the opportunity, specifically because most of what I work with has been suicidality and kind of self-harm. I've really gotten to see how families deal with resiliency and what we can see to like build that resiliency. Because I think often when we're talking about kind of resiliency and how that works in the world, it kind of feels like, oh, I'm either built with it or I'm not built with it, and or like a lot of bad things have to happen for me to get really resilient. And I feel like those are not entirely how resiliency comes to be. So I really want to have a conversation around how we can kind of work on building resiliency in our everyday life and being able to have more ability to kind of manage when difficult things occur. In doing the research, when I went over resiliency, there were kind of 6 to 7 key points that came up again and again. But when we look at resiliency and like how we manage within social conversations or social constructs of like the holidays and being with other individual, there were 3 key themes that just kept coming up. Those key themes are we have to be able to emotionally regulate, we have to be able to use our social supports, and we have to be able to understand reality as it is in the moment. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into ways that we'd be able to kind of manage those, but those are the 3 points that we're going to kind of keep coming back to. So the first part is being able to emotionally regulate. This is a concept, right? If we are at a holiday party and we have our uncle that is going to say a snide comment to us the moment we come in, how are we able to kind of sit with it, take the impact of it, and not like rise to the occasion? Or if we are going to rise to the occasion, how do we not like spill over or not? How do we not dwell on it afterwards? So, emotion regulation is simply the concept of how do we keep our emotions at a baseline level rather than having them go up or down in ways that we feel like we can't control. Emotions are going to travel on the spectrum of feelings often, and we're going to have a lot of different ones, but being able to have a little bit more control of what range they're going to land on is what we would be looking on when we look at emotion regulation. Um, the main like toolkit that I like to use around emotion regulation is going to be grounding. So grounding is the concept of being able to be in the present moment. So how do I get myself into this moment, not in my head, not in what the future will be, not in the stupid thing that I said 3 minutes ago? How do I sit in this moment and appreciate and work through this one rather than everything else? There's about 150 different ways that we can work on grounding. It is one of the basic tenets of a lot of mindfulness. I would like to go over the sensation side of it. Um, I really, really enjoy looking at sensation work as grounding, mainly because it's working with your body, and going to be working with like that system rather than like trying to take change a thought to get us grounded. Because often when we're trying to feel a lot of emotions, trying to work through a cognitive thought is not the easiest way to be able to get us in the moment. So I really like focusing on like body sensations to be able to have like the physicality of myself be able to help me get into the moment. So, what we will look at when we look at grounding, the most common that you guys have probably already heard is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So, this is going to be using our five senses. So, you will use five things you can see, four things that you can hear, three things that you can feel, two things that you can smell, and one thing that you can taste, and kind of like work through those. What I really like about this one is it also makes you use other grounding techniques as you're doing it. If you need to figure out what you need to smell around you, that also means you have to take a deep breath. So it's going to like automatically remind you to take a breath in that moment. And like if we're trying to figure out what we can hear around us, because there's often not that much stimuli that's like very loud, that also like makes us stop our own like if we're being loud or if we're feeling like internally loud, it helps like us remind that we have to like go down a little bit to be able to hear things. So it will work on kind of some of those systems coming back online. When I'm working with my teenagers, I also really talk about how do we use objects and things to bring in that sensation work. So sometimes we are not in a space to be able to do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You might be in the middle of a conversation with someone, and it's going to look really weird if you stop to try and do all of those things. So I talk to kids about how do we use sensations to be able to ground in the present moment. So my favorite one is actually using a warhead. So if we are just able to like grab a warhead, you can do this with anything minty, anything sour, anything super spicy. But I found that not a lot of people think you're using a mental health skill if you're just popping a piece of candy. So if you use a warhead, it basically is going to have the sensational impact of making it so it's hard for you to have cognitive thoughts. If you've ever put a warhead in, it's going to do the like sour face and it makes it really hard for you to have a lot of like really like large thought processes of how that's going to like file through quickly for you. So, in doing that, it helps give your brain a break from whatever cognitive loop you were on. If you're worried about what was happening or you're worried what you're going to say next, that can help give you that moment for your brain to stop the ladder of thoughts that it's having. It has to like take a physical step aside to process this now sour sensation that it's given you. And then when you come back to the thoughts, you can start a new way of thinking rather than staying on the same ladder that you were on. I've also had people do this with like having a set of like essential oils or something like that. I've even seen people have like bracelets that'll have it where they can like put it on a bracelet so they can just kind of put the bracelet close to their face. But something that is going to use one of your five senses to like pull you down into the moment. So when we're looking to emotionally regulate, it's just being able to get into the moment and be able to like say what we want to say, how we want to say it, rather than letting our emotions or our cognitions kind of take over and take it to an extreme that we don't want to go to. So, as we kind of look at this resiliency, resilient people are able to do that and do it consistently and are able to see good outcomes in conversations, which helps them be able to emotionally regulate better because now they've seen when I emotionally regulate, these conversations go better. And I can put that onto kind of the scale of good and bad things that happen. The second point is looking at these social supports. So, when we look at the definition of resiliency, it is the concept of are we able to withstand and or recover quickly from a difficult event? So, when we're looking at emotion regulation, that's often how do we withstand in the moment by grounding? And then how do we, if we were not able to withstand, can we use a grounding to be able to recover quickly so we're not worried about what that person said for the next 15 hours and recalculating how we're going to like manage it. So the emotion regulation kind of works on those two systems. The social supports are ways that we're able to like withstand by asking for help or recover quickly by having other individuals be able to kind of keep us in a space that is helpful. I will use some vulnerability here. And when I first looked into the resiliency research, I really wanted it to say that it was an individual event that I could practice something in my own space and get better at it. And it's just not true. Every single piece of resiliency research that I found always had a social support component. So what we see is that's great. I can say that you want social supports all day. The issue is, A, we need to understand how to make social supports because as I've gotten older, I've realized making friends as an adult can be very, very difficult. But also, B, once we have this social support system, how do we know how to utilize it in a way that makes sense? Those two key components help build that resiliency. If you have 100 friends but don't know how to use those friends or ask for help, that isn't going to increase your resiliency at all. That's just you are a really good friend and have a lot of people to talk to. Um, so when we look at how do we use these friends and how do we use these social supports and family and coworkers and things like that as people that can help build our resiliency, it's being able to see how do we ask for help from them and how do we ask for the things that we need in a way that is effective for what they can do. I love one of my friends that I was talking to this about, described it as who's my board of directors. She comes from a very corporate world. That is not how I would analyze it, but I liked that idea of who is your board of directors and what thing are they good at? So if we kind of look at our social supports and we're going into the holidays, who is the friend that you can text and say, or the family member that's like, oh my goodness, this aunt is doing that thing that she always does, and I need you to understand it because I'm going crazy just having to listen to it. Um, versus who is the friend that if someone says something that like absolutely hurts your feelings is gonna be there to like help remind you that you are a good, strong person and what that person said like doesn't define you. Um, Versus like you may need a person that was like, that's really hard. Can we go get dinner next week? Because I think I'm going to get my like resources back. So being able to kind of pinpoint which friend or family member or coworker is going to kind of be able to help you in each kind of system. Um, my friends will often joke that I'm the 100 friend. I am the friend that will help you move. I am the friend that will like come in the middle of the night and like make sure if you need to go to the hospital, I would take you to the hospital. I am not the friend that's going to remember to text you on an anniversary or your birthday. Absolutely not the things that I'm good at. So even though I can do the 100 things, I am not the friend that you're probably going to call on for the 50 things. And that is okay. But it's helpful for my friends to realize that they are going to be disappointed and not get the resiliency pushback that they need if they're asking me to be able to help remind them and send them a text when it's a hard day. I'm not going to be the person that's going to help them grow in that space. They're going to need to look at the other board of director that may be better at that, but I will be the person that can show up at the middle of the night and help you get through the hard thing. And that is how I can help my friends build resiliency by when they ask for help on a big level, I'm the person that can come and make sure that they are able to kind of weather the storm and I can withstand it with them. So it's not just looking at the social supports you have, but it's also how to utilize them effectively. Um, because we are social creatures and we crave being able to kind of have those social components. And holidays get really hard because all of a sudden you are socializing all the time and maybe not with all of the people that you enjoy socializing with. So making sure that you kind of use those points that we have to socialize as ways for support and additional help. And the thing that I hear often as a reminder to myself and is really effective to be able to remember is your friends can't show up for you if you don't ask them to show up. So, making sure you give the people in your life opportunities to be able to support you in the ways that you need helps everyone be able to kind of build that resiliency, build that trust, build that like well for each other. If you're not letting them in or not allowing them to have space to help you, it really like breaks that ability for them to be able to like come to your aid when you need it. You don't have to tell everyone your whole life about everything, but being able to make sure you do have enough people in your corner that do know how to help and that we can kind of give articulate or articulate our needs to them. Um, hey, I just need to vent about this. I don't really need solutions right now. Or, hey, I really am at capacity and I could really use some solutions right this second because I need some help thinking this through that. Simple statements like that can really help your social supports know how to help you build in that space. And that's something that I have found is one of those like minor changes we can make that make the resiliency get bigger and bigger because each time we're able to see that people show up for us and each time that we're able to see that we can do hard things and we can ask people for help and people will show up for that help, it helps us recognize that the next time we have a difficult task we are resilient enough to make it through and we are able to have people that care about us and we are right. If we go back to the like fundamentals, we are good enough to deserve to be able to make it through hard things and we are strong enough to deserve to make it through hard things. The last kind of component, so that's our emotion regulation, and that is our building of social supports. The third one is being able to accept reality for how it really is. There is a little term inside of the therapy that I do often that's called dialectics. It is a big fancy word for the concept of we can hold two truths at the same time, even if they don't like make sense or are polarizing to each other. Um, to a teenager, that answer is usually I hate my mom, I love my mom. Teenagers are really good about feeling those emotions at the same point. And I think about on the holidays, everybody gets really good at feeling those 2 points at the same time. I really care about my family and I'm really annoyed about my family. So those two concepts can hold true at the same time. Our bodies don't love holding those two concepts at the same time, so they sometimes feel a lot of emotions around that, but they are both true entities. We also see that in resilient people. Resilient people are very good at being hopeful, but also understanding where reality is right this second. So they're able to hold both of those concepts incredibly well. What I mean by this is we can be hopeful for the future to look different, but we need to prepare for our present for what it is. Um, I always have a family member when I kind of like go to family events that always informs me that I look prettier without makeup. At 16, I was kind of offended because I was very excited to be trying all the new makeup up. At 22, I thought I could beat the system, so I didn't wear makeup that one year to try and not have to deal with the conversation. And I got, see, you're not wearing makeup today. You look gorgeous. You should do that more often. I couldn't beat the system. At 33, I now recognize we're gonna have that conversation every holiday, and I just have to prepare for what that looks like. I'm not going to get that person to change. So, the reality of my situation, that family member is going to say that to me every single time. And I think often when we get to the holidays, there's magic and hope, and there's a lot of like feelings that make us think like maybe this will be the year. And I think sometimes we get into the trap of using a lot of energy trying to hope that this will be the year that they won't do it, rather than going ahead and putting on our armor and figuring out how to protect ourselves from the conversation we know we're going to have. So I think it's really important for that concept to be aware of. We are aware of our reality. We understand what it's going to look like. Um, And not in like a suck it up buttercup kind of way, in a I deserve to be in a space that I have a little bit of control over, and I deserve to be in a space that I can prepare myself and be able to hold my head up high in how I'm going to respond to this rather than feeling like very attacked. Because at the end of the day, for that family member, it's not about the makeup at all, right? They just have something to say to me. And I think it took me a long time not to take it personally, but every time I took it personally, I would do a little like side sweat back, or I would make some other little comment towards them. And it didn't really get me anywhere. For noticing I did not have a good emotion regulation around that concept the first couple times it happened. Um, and I actually used some of my social supports and was like, what's going on? What do I do? Like, I don't know how to handle this. And some people were like, it's not about you. And you just got to recognize, like, how do we move through some of these situations? So I think as we are looking at accepting reality, sometimes it is being able to look down and be like, what is them and what is me? Like, what are certain things that I know that individual is going to come with and is part of their personality? Because if it's part of their personality, it's kind of not on me to have to change that for them. And there's a lots of different ways to start solving that problem once we know what reality looks like. So, the thing I really appreciate about being able to like accurately understand what a situation is it lets us get really curious then. Once we know what we're up against, we get to be in a space where we can be curious and have new creative ideas because we're not fighting against, I wish it was different. I wish it didn't look like this. I wish something could be anywhere different than it is right now. When we're spending all of our energy in that space, that doesn't allow any creativity or curiosity to come up with like a new way to respond to the situation. So, in an interesting way, kind of sitting in the facts of life lets you be creative about how you want to manage life. Um, the last kind of piece we see in this accepting reality and the dialectic of being hopeful but being realistic is we find that people that have really high resiliency have the ability to express gratitude in really mundane ways. So when we're kind of looking at this topic, um, it's really important, I think, to find the everyday moments to be grateful, in whichever way makes sense to kind of your lifestyle. I've seen gratitude be done a bazillion different ways. Some of them that I really, really like are I've seen people do the ABCs. So you go from A to Z and kind of write it on a piece of paper and you write which letter you have for each of those. And so you can kind of see more creative ways to be grateful because I think often, right, we just got out of Thanksgiving. I'm thankful for my house. I'm thankful for my family. I'm thankful for my friends. And I think sometimes when we repeat these over and over, they kind of lose their oomph on things. Um, One of my favorite ways to do gratitude is actually look for like really silly things that make me happy and like out of the box things. Um, One of the ones that I'll often share is like, this is actually very true in my life. I am very grateful that acid rain was not as big of a problem as I thought it was. I remember very deeply as a child that I was convinced that acid rain was going to be everywhere, and I have yet to have to deal with acid rain. I think same goes for quicksand. I thought quicksand was going to pop out in the middle of Georgia and just eat me whole one day. Um, and I, or like, I'm thankful that like spoons exist because eating soup with a fork would just suck. And that would be really annoying to have to do all the times. So I will challenge myself each day to kind of come up with a new like creative thing I'm thankful for because I think that helps open up the opportunity to start seeing more good things. What we find with gratitude is the more often that we can like train our brain to find good, it will start finding good on its own. So I like sometimes doing the silly ones because house, friends, and family, I can't get more of those, right? I guess I could. I'm not at a space that I'm going to have multiple homes right this second. So I think being able to recognize when we can kind of get it to the small pieces, we're able to start building that ground of finding better and better things about our life. And when we have a good gratitude foundation, we get to have that hopefulness and reality that helps like kind of be the armor that we need when we're looking at resiliency. Because resiliency is this push and pull of how do I put armor on, but let people see through the armor enough to help me when I need it. So it's the ability to go back and forth between these two spaces. But part of it is armor, and ways that we can kind of build armor is like gratitude and reality checking and being able to kind of like check our emotions in the moment. But overall, as we kind of look at how to build more resiliency throughout our time, the key kind of three takeaways, if you take nothing else away from my conversation, is emotionally regulate, being able to ask our friends, family, and coworkers for support, and being able to like accept reality for what it looks like. So with that, I think we may be able to go to some of the like questions that people may have.
Great. Thanks, Taylor. Thank you for sharing your own story and being a bit vulnerable in front of everyone. I know that can't be easy. So I'll see if anyone has questions or wants to chat or wants to just raise their hand and unmute for a minute. I think that would be fine too. But maybe while we wait for people to ask their questions, so in that story with where you shared that, you were getting those unwanted comments, and whatever you do, whether you do what you think is right or you do whatever you want, you're gonna get those comments, or you're gonna get maybe some unwanted feedback, unrequested feedback. So is there anything that you did more personally, or how did you get to that point where you were like, you know what, I'm just going to do whatever I want because I'm going to get the feedback anyway? How did
Yeah,
you get to that point?
it was a journey. Also, I think kind of looking at those pieces, two main things kind of helped me go over the like ability to be able to manage it consistently. I think the first piece was being able to like recognize that I changed my behavior and it didn't matter. Like I did throw no makeup on one day and I still got the same comment. So recognize
Mm,
that helped me be like, cool, this actually isn't about my behavior. Like my behavior is not the only thing that is like prompting this. They've got a deeper issue somewhere about something. And it let me kind of like take the grudge out because I was holding it so deeply. I was like, why do you not want to like me for who I am? Like obviously, I spent a lot of time to put the makeup on. I liked how I looked with the makeup on. I did it on purpose. So I think helping myself recognize that that was a comment that they felt was appropriate to make, and it didn't have to impact how I viewed myself. So just because someone makes a comment doesn't mean that comment is truth, and it doesn't mean that that comment has to be like constructive criticism. That is not something that I felt like I needed. And I think I do that often at like family events when there's a lot of people that may not see you as often and may not like know your full life story. They may have like lots of information for you, and I've had to sit and kind of learn of like which one of these are constructive criticism for people that know my whole story and which ones are like comments that people just make that I can kind of put into a bucket of like, cool, that was a comment that was made and I can kind of move on versus like what's information that I would like to take to like build something that makes sense for me. So it's a very long-winded way to say I had to learn how to not take things personally.
yeah. It takes time. It takes time and definitely a lot of practice. I liked how you say you've got to train your brain to find the good, or you've got to train your brain to react a certain way to, you know, exterior, the environment.
Mhm.
Um, but we have a question in the chat that I just received. So how can we deal with relatives who ask super personal and invasive questions in front of others? For instance, when will you have children?
Yeah, that is the quintessential question that we have. So if we kind of look at resiliency as being able to withstand and or recover quickly, I think it kind of you got to use both in those invasive questions. Um, First part is learning and I know this might sound dumb to some people, but like practicing in the mirror saying, I don't want to answer that question. Or practicing with, that's not something I want to discuss now, or like whatever version and tone makes sense for you of the boundary around like that's not a conversation I want to have in front of my grandparents right now. So I think the first part of that is recognizing if you want to answer it. You are not required or like needed to answer anyone asking you personal questions just because they're a family member. I think often we have this like innate ability to feel like, oh no, I have to respond because grandma or grandpa asked it, and you can't be rude or disrespectful to grandma or grandpa. And I think there are times that like this is not the time or space to talk about it. So practicing that exact response of I appreciate that you're interested and that's not a conversation I feel comfortable with right this second. So that's kind of the like withstanding part of like how do we sit in the like I'm just not going to go there. Now, there are some family members that are not going to let you not go there because a boundary is something that you do, not how someone responds. So, how a boundary works is I say, I'm not going to have that conversation. That does not mean that person B can't say, oh, no, we gonna have that conversation. It only means that I can make the statement I made. So, I have very much had the conversation of, yeah, I'd really prefer not to talk about that. And the person come back with something to the equivalent of, oh, but why not? Like, we're all talking about it. Everybody wants to know, blah, 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 blah. So, A, recognizing we want to set boundaries, but boundaries can also be crossed. And then B, being if you feel that you like have to answer or now because this person asked it again, you want to answer, knowing what your line is and making it a quick line. You don't have, if specifically if it's like, oh, when are you going to have babies? The answer could just be, I'm unsure. And we don't have to say I'm unsure because the blah, 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 blah. I feel like when we get to personal questions, people feel the need to overshare the answer to that. So often being able to have a really short answer can like dampen the ability for people to ask a lot more questions because you haven't opened yourself up as much. Um, the third thing I will add to that is like sometimes we get to walk away. If someone is asking continuous invasive questions, I know this sounds kind of silly. The bathroom is your friend at a family event. Like, who's going to stop you from going to the restroom? And I think sometimes you got to use it. Sometimes you just got to be like, I don't think I can talk about that right this second. And I really have to run to the restroom. I'll be right back. No one has to know how long you're gone. I don't care if you use the restroom or not. You can go in there and play on your phone for 5 minutes and use that to emotionally regulate how you're going to manage through things. That's reasonable. I think we often will like go against our own personal values to not come across or as rude and aggressive. And I think there's a way to understand that someone asking those invasive questions can be rude and aggressive on their end, and we don't have to like match that energy. We're allowed to kind of have our own personal space. Um, and I think you got to know your family members. Which family member can hear, no, I don't really like want to talk about that and we'll let it go. And which ones you just say, I'm unsure, so we can like keep the conversation going. So I think it's also accepting that reality and knowing like this family member can tolerate this and this one can't. And this family member, I'm probably going to have to go out into the back porch and take a breather afterwards because they're going to ask me 15 questions that I don't want to handle. So I think it's slotting into like one of those three spaces.
Yeah, and then sitting next to the right person that's going to maybe respect your boundaries a little more.
Yes, I think having the buddy system is really, really important in family
Mm,
events and not
mhm.
sitting yourself across from the person that you know is going to ask you the 72 questions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Another question I got in the chat is how do you recommend we handle politically charged questions or comments if we have very different views?
Yeah. Um, this I think is the question that I've gotten the most actually in the therapy room. Kind of when we're aware that conversations are going to occur. That piece, and it's why I like harped on it as much as I did, is like accepting reality is like knowing you're gonna have them. I think if you have pretty politically charged families that are like on the opposite end of the spectrum, go ahead and prep for it to happen. This is not the year that someone's not gonna bring up a political statement. If any year, this is the year that they're gonna make some statement. Um, I think it's recognizing your values and recognizing what your like goal and intention is in that space. Because I think that's a broad question that is going to have different answers. Me, for example, I am not trying to be a social justice warrior inside of my own family. I am not going to choose to try and like sit in a conversation and have like a intelligent debate with someone. I am someone that is going to choose like I want to protect the peace of the holidays more than I would like to change social justice in that moment. And that is like the value set I have. So often my response to that is I usually just walk away for those conversations. They are something that I will get really charged about if I stay in them. So I tend to, when I see the rumblings, that's when I want my second plate of food. That is when I would like a dessert. That is when I'm going to go take a 5 minute walk outside. But that's because my values are keeping the peace rather than like having that conversation. I know there are a lot of people that like keeping the peace is not their highest value when it comes to a political conversation. So I think if you are someone that lands more on the I would like to make sure that my like opinions and voice is heard in this space, I think that side of the spectrum needs to like know what you are trying to accomplish and when you stop accomplishing that. So, if your goal is to be able to make sure that this person knows this kind of side of the argument, go ahead and practice that side of the argument. Know what key points you want, but then also know once you've gotten to 45 minutes, your key points probably got lost in the sauce somewhere. So, like, recognizing, okay, when we get to round 5 of the verbal sparring, or if someone starts making more outlandish comments, maybe that's the time that I disengage, or maybe that's the time that I bring it to a new topic. But I think recognizing what your goal when a political conversation comes up is going to help decide what that like behavior set is going to look like for you. Um, because both sides of that are perfectly valid. And I think in the middle, there's a round of I want to say my one sentence and then I want to bring something else up. I'll also say if there are kids in that household, bring up something cute the kid is saying. That is a very surefire way to get off of a conversation. Like, use your environment sometimes. If there's a cute kid over there, be like, oh my goodness, I just realized they got bigger. Or if you know that this uncle also really enjoys fishing, slide the conversation over how big of a fish he recently caught. Like, use your social awareness to also know like when it's time to slide in and use your environment to your advantage. Like, I think often, specifically in political conversations, people get really like narrow and like stop recognizing when we can get out of things and we can still use our environment or use other tactical ways to kind of move out of a situation before we get to everyone screaming over the dinner table and starting to use like more aggressive language. So I think it's
Mhm.
understanding the temperature and understanding your goals.
Mhm. Yeah, because even if you build on making sure that you're keeping the conversation polite, it's not everyone has the same objective. It's kind of who speaks the loudest, or so it's yeah, it's a struggle. Okay. Something else that has come up, you talked about building a board of directors. Are there any tricks for identifying the type of support a friend or family member can provide?
Yeah. I think when we kind of look at that like board of director idea, I've come up with like two ways of how I kind of like recognize how I want to call on supports of each person. The first one is like, what is their natural tendencies? So where do I see that they show up for me already? So if I kind of look at that friendship, where does this friend naturally tend to do really well for me? Um, who are the people that will, send me a happy birthday thing every single time. I think I have, an aunt that I've never even met that has wished me a happy birthday every year of my life on Facebook. So like being able to recognize what do they do naturally are, this also kind of goes into the like love languages. Like, does this person tend to like talk to me more or do acts of service for me more? So like kind of just recognizing their natural baseline. And then the other piece is recognizing um who we gravitate in certain situations and how the like responsive level we've gotten. Because I think often people want to do the like square peg in the circle hole and be like, when I'm really upset, I want to talk to my mom. But then if I recognize that my mom does not pick up phone calls very often, she stops being a helpful person for me to go to. So even if my gut reaction is I want to go to this person, it's kind of filing through of like, and does she have the capacity to show up in the way that I want? In my board of directors, I have one friend that I love deeply and sincerely, and she has not responded to a text and phone call in like 6 months. And I just know that about her. That it will never happen. And one day she is going to call me and we're going to talk for 2.5 hours about really deep, really intense things. That is just what her friendship level is. But if I needed something the same day to have emotional support on, she is the worst person for me to pick because I know she is not going to pick up that phone call. So I think it's just having an idea around recognizing their strengths, recognizing where you land, and when you recognize where you land, can that person show up the way you want, or are you just trying to force them to show up the way that you want? So kind of like having a real check-in of like, does this friend make sense in this role? Not just do I want them to be that person in that role?
Mhm. That makes sense. Thanks. I do like the idea of board of directors. It's like I'm managing my life like I manage how I would manage a business.
Yeah.
And you need the best advisors.
And each one has its own little role. It
Right.
doesn't help if they all are the exact same role.
Hmm.
We need someone to do finance, and it won't be me.
We have another question in the chat. Can we get more tips on allowing the things people say to roll off versus stewing on them? I overanalyze situations and conversations, especially later. How do I not do this?
Yeah, you remembered ranch at 2 a.m. that you forgot to give a table. Um, yeah, I think part of that is being really intentional. I remember one of the first pieces of advice I ever got from my therapist when I was a wee little 16-year-old was if you're gonna worry, make it matter. And she used to make me set a timer and say, "Great, worry about this thing for the next 20 minutes." And I remember it being I was like, yeah, sure. Oh, I can worry about this absolutely for 20 minutes. And something about when I set the timer, it just felt gross. It like no longer was helpful. And she's like, yeah, but pick how much time during the day. And I had probably spent 2.5 hours worrying about it through the whole day, just in bits and pieces and thoughts about it. So from that day, I've really sat with make the worry matter. And I think when we start analyzing, trying to figure out what you're hoping to get out of it, like instead of just going through the like, oh my gosh, they brought up that my shirt was red. Like, what did they mean by that? What did they care? Like, trying to ask yourself, if I solve this like riddle that I now have, because your brain has turned it into a riddle, if I solve this riddle, like, what am I hoping to gain? And I often think we find when we get to the riddle, even if we were to solve it, nothing would change and nothing would be able to be like fixed or we wouldn't learn new eternal truths about things. And I also really enjoy the statement of like, is this person a person that you want to take life advice from? Because I think we often take life advice from the loudest person in the room, not the person we trust the most. So if it is someone that you know does not live the life that you would like to lead and they are making a lot of charged comments at you, maybe remembering that like their advice is would lead to their life and that is like not the life that you are trying to lead. So being able to give yourself a little bit of an oomph in realizing that like that person's statement isn't here to like impact your life and or like we're just DBT would use the concept of we are choosing to live in misery in that point, and like you deserve better than to choose and live it in misery. Um, we deserve to be able to have kind, nice thoughts about ourselves.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions at most. I really like your practice of finding gratitude for silly things. Can you talk more about how gratitude combats cynicism or the feeling of hopelessness?
Yeah. So oh, I'm gonna get this stat wrong. Someone can, I would please recommend Googling it afterwards because it's either 5 or 7. But I think the stat lands on we need 5 positive things for every 1 negative thing that happens for us. So if you are a cynic at heart, we're often going to see that is a lot of positive things that you are going to have to find because your brain is trained for 1 and it's trained for 2 and it's trained for 3. And if we find 5 bad things, that means we have to have 25 good things to come out of it. We're probably not going to have 25 spectacular things happen. So the concept of coming up with looking for the silly or looking for the mundane is because if I need 5 bad things probably happened to me yesterday. Yesterday was not a great day. I had to actively start searching for good things because they weren't going to naturally arise at the level of that I felt I needed them. You would have had to come with the big check that has my name on it to have given me like a big enough win for me to notice it yesterday. Um, and I kind of have a lot of people in my life that were like, nah, you get to sit and say what actually went correct today. Because as we have more and more negative things that happen, I think our worldview just will tilt to find more and more for them. So part of it is the concept of the world is like many people are finding the world bad and scary in this exact moment, which is leaning some cynicism on either, side of the political world of like there's a lot of scary things going on. And how do we find space to remember that like we deserve to be happy? And I think it's kind of brave. I'm going to say a controversial thing right this second, but I do think it's kind of brave to be happy. I know I've sat in a conversation where everyone was like complaining about their job. It felt weird to be like, no, my job's actually doing pretty good right this second because I like wanted to be part of the in crowd. I wanted to be like, oh yeah, my boss also sucks. So I think also sometimes sitting in the space of like, I deserve to like have nice things and like things and it's okay to say, "No, my job's going okay right this second." I don't have to search for why something isn't working right this second. It's okay that some things are working and we're allowed to be happy that certain things are going well even when like it feels like a lot of things are going wrong for other people.
Mm. Sometimes I feel like it's easier to bond over what's bad than to
Yeah,
bond over what's good. That's
absolutely.
my, yeah,
The
it's interesting.
socializing of it is very interesting. It's like, man, if we
Hmm.
both don't like this person, we are BFFs forever now.
Right. Great. I think it's time for us to wrap up. Do you have, Taylor, any final words, anything that you want to kind of wrap up on, or anything that we didn't touch on that you'd like to make sure is shared before
No,
we conclude?
I think overall the questions were fantastic. So it kind of got to all of the like secondary hopes that I was wanting to make sure I hit. And I just really appreciate TEDx for kind of giving us this opportunity to be able to kind of work on resiliency and work on this like holiday season. And I'm just really grateful to kind of everyone that was able to take time out of their Tuesday to come show up.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Taylor, and thank you, Hillside, for partnering with TEDxAtlanta on this webinar. We're always looking to partner with local organizations, so this was great. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to prepare for this. And thank you for everyone who joined. Hopefully, I will see everyone in person at one of our next events. But in the meantime, happy holidays. Hopefully, this helped for what's to come for everyone here. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.